I got a question about how much do you look at a company that you're going to work for and know that these are the people we want to work for? And the reason is, I'll go back to reading, Mark Leonard's financial documents, and he starts putting a lot of trust in his business managers and moves them down. He actually allows each business unit to invest capital to acquisitions, and it's not really required to run it up the flagpole. What do you look for? And hey, Mr. Private Equity, you got 10 companies. I know that I can work with you because you've created the culture of trust between the acquirer and the acquisition.
Oh man, yeah, a lot there. But I'll just have some thoughts on that. But I'll say at the outset that you're raising a question that private equity firms are having to wrestle with, whether they're doing so consciously or not, which is this distinction between centralized and decentralized management and decision making. Are we at the private equity firm really owning the value creation agenda and we're getting the company to do that? Or are we, on the other end of the curve, in the way that you've described, John, are we decentralizing responsibility and decision making down to the portfolio company CEOs? And where do we fall on that spectrum? And how do so this is like, I find myself having this conversation with clients often of we everybody around the table, the leadership team, the board, the investors knows that the agenda is value creation. The agenda is creating equity value. But there's oftentimes not really clarity on who's bringing what to that party and who has the ability to make what decisions on that. And Constellation and Alpine, my old firm, has a couple of firms that have done this really well, believes in hiring great people, making sure we're aligned with them, which was the crux of your question I'll talk about in a second, and then getting out of their way and allowing them to make the call and own the results.
Right.
But so in terms of what does it take to be able to do that?
Let's say if somebody says, I have a desire to do that, but I don't have the skills right now to do that.
Yep. I think, what comes to mind, there's a few things that roll around in my mind as you ask this question. The thing that comes to mind for me is simply ensuring you have the right CEO. And that's not a panacea. That's not to say that if you get the right CEO, everything else is magically going to happen and you as a board can just kind of let go of the reins. But it is to say that, the CEO being the primary point of contact for a primary partner for a private equity firm, if you don't have that person right, then it's going to be really difficult to let go of the reins and let them do their thing. So that of course begs a question of, well, what is the right CEO? And I have this was a topic of immense study for me over the last 10 years. When I was in private equity, I'd led our CEO hiring for a while and we created this program called the CEO and Training Program, and which is all about grooming the next generation of CEOs for our portfolio. And so I both studied a lot, all the research and perspective out there on what makes a great CEO. And then I just observed, a lot of CEOs myself. And I think a couple things really bubble up for me as being the most important things to see in that person, to know that you can give them the reins and instill trust in them. And these are, we at my old firm distinguished between what we called skills and attributes. Skills being classically thought of as the hard stuff, and attributes being classically thought of as the soft stuff. I don't like that language, but you get the point. And our view was that getting the soft stuff right, getting the attributes right, was considerably more important than getting the skills right. That's not to say you could have a CEO that was just, didn't have the skills required for the situation. But it is to say that there are lots of people out there that will have the skills required for the situation. And the thing that can really be a make or break factor is getting the attributes. So what do we mean by attributes? We boiled it down to three things that we had to have in every CEO we worked with at a sufficient degree. We call them the EQ, the IQ, the EQ, the AQ, and the GM. The EQ being emotional quotient, emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And emotional intelligence tends to be, to your earlier point of trust. Having high emotional intelligence tends to go hand in hand with a really trusting relationship in terms of, CEOs very self-aware. They're very forthcoming with you. They can understand their investors' needs and work within those. And those tend to be the types of behaviors you see with a high EQ executive. So EQ is number one. AQ number two of being AQ being adversity quotient, the run through walls factor, the I'm not going to let anything get in my way of delivering results factor. And when you had a CEO that had that, we knew that if they got knocked down or we had a bad quarter, they were going to get right back up. And we didn't have to worry about pressuring them or yelling at them. We just knew that because this was in them, they would, when the next wall or hurdle came up, they would run through it. They'd figure out a way to get around it. And then the GM was the growth mindset. And this is, become a little bit buzzwordy and cliche out there nowadays, but the growth mindset is working with CEOs that are always learning and have this insatiable appetite for learning.
Masterminds, consuming books, going to, learning for somebody else. Yeah. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you're a subscriber by clicking on this button right here down below. And if you want to watch more serial acquirer interviews, click on this button right here. If you're ready to buy your first business, get my course at dealflowsystem.net right here. Take care. Cheers, John.